growers to how many acre inches applied that the pivot is laying down as it goes through the year. So we make it easy for grower to see where they are, what they have available, and through some other software like with CropMetrics, it'd say, okay, based on the weather forecast, we think you're going to need this much more.
And if you don't get rain, assuming corn's 25 inches, you get 12 inches of allocation and you get 4 inches of soil moisture to start the season, you're at a deficit. So, you've got to figure out how to use that weather model, utilize in real time just how much you're pumping that at your smartphone that you've only pumped 2.3 acre inches. You've got your 0.7 or your 9.7 is in the bank so far. So it is imperative that we are able to assess that in real time.
So Stephen, you're the one that mentioned at the top of the show too much information. Of information that's rolled up that you can manage and work with, and life is better. How big a deal is reporting that Terry's talking about?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, that's the only way we're going to find out how we did, right? So.
Let's pivot. I'm sorry, Stephen, I jumped on top of you. My apologies.
You're fine.
David, let's send it over to you. You are the highest level assistant outsourced brain of the grower. How do you help growers make sense of this and determine what to do next and how to do it? And that's a segue to your show. So give us a little introduction, and the rest of us we should just turn our cameras off and let David go.
Yeah, we can do the presentation and I'll go. That way we don't repeat.
Okay. There you go.
All right, very good. So United Ag works together with growers and agronomists to apply precision agronomy solutions that deliver positive return on them. And how we do that really is to focus bridging the gap between the technology that we use and a management decision on the farm. We're able to work with growers to effectively use that technology to characterize spatial variability in the soil and plotter where and when it needs it. The tools and technologies that we use include the CropMetrics precision irrigation solutions, and we use those to generate variable rate irrigation prescriptions and monitor soil moisture and provide irrigation scheduling recommendations. We'll use dual EM, EC, and RTK elevation mapping to be able to identify the spatial variability of soils. We use aerial imagery to help us understand distribution uniformity issues and performance of our irrigation. Although drone-flown imagery is the buzz these days, for reasons of quality, reliability, and cost, we use manned aircraft for color NIR, NDVI, and thermal imagery. Centec soil moisture and aid in scheduling irrigation. We also use the various pivot controllers, including AgSense Field Commander, which, by the way, is the most capable of controllers as far as managing variable rate prescriptions. We also can use Valley Select 2 and Pro 2 panels, Dematic FieldNet, and Ranky RPM touchscreen panels. All of these are on these prescriptions. The focus of United Ag Precision Agronomy Solutions is to bridge the gap between technology and a management decision on the farm. As a precision irrigation service provider, it's our job to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each technology, of these tools, how they apply to crop production, how they help growers to integrate these tools effectively into your operation. So United Ag Precision Agronomy Solutions works with growers and agronomists to understand field-specific challenges and the irrigation goals of that field, and then apply the appropriate technology to create the desired result. I'll give you an example of how this works. So EC, or electrical conductivity, is relative to soil texture. And I'll just throw out a caution here. There are a lot of industry individuals who are mapping. Be aware that sensors are very finicky, and we need to make sure that we're mapping under the right conditions in order to have accurate, effective maps. So we start with an accurate EC map, which is relative to soil texture, and then we create variable rate prescriptions, either variable speed or variable or zone control, that put water in the sandy area and less water in the heavier clay area. All of our variable irrigation decisions are driven with agronomic purpose. Simply because we now have color gauge does not mean it makes sense agronomic. Remember, production is not an element equation. Although water holding capacity is a key factor to water management, it's not the only factor. Therefore, as I've mentioned, we start with the EC layer, then overlay other layers of information, including grower experience, agronomic field assessment data, elevation soil test data, aerial imagery, yield maps. Consider the influence of landscape, slope, aspect, infiltration, compaction, layered cells, high salt, perched water tables, as well as the seasonal influence of plant genetics, weather, weeds, disease. And then finally adjust the management zone and prescriptions based on yield limiting every time you irrigate. The magnitude of variation in water applied, how often to run, when to adjust the variable rate prescription, all depends upon current field conditions and management dynamics of the grower. Variable rate irrigation helps to apply water where it is needed. Soil moisture monitoring guides when and how much. The individual sensor graph at the top helps us to understand the depth of infiltration, amount of water leached past the root zone, and the active rooting depth, to what depth water is being removed by the crop. The profile summed graph on the bottom helps us to understand how much water is held in the profile, and of that water, how much is available to the crop. Shallow frequent irrigations are inefficient and have a higher evaporative loss. Deep, less frequent irrigations reduce evaporative water loss, lower energy costs, and minimize wear and tear on the pivot. At the same time, they also encourage root development and improve nutrient uptake to the plant, producing higher yield. Let's take a trip back in time for a minute. I can remember when I was a young boy and wanted to slush school. I would wrap myself up in an electric blanket and place a thermometer next to the heat coil until that thermometer would get to about 105 degrees, in my mouth, and my mom would walk in and say, "Oh, you poor dear, you're sick, you better lay down and take a nap," so I wouldn't have to go to school. While bad data served me well as a kid, when we're trying to grow a crop, no data is better than bad data. Technology does not replace feet in the field. Although we trust data, we have to validate that that number and color on a page means something agronomically and is relative to actual field conditions and crop water needs. Soil moisture sensors and other technology are great. However, remember that they're software, electronics, and mechanics. Crop production is a living, dynamic system. Like the effect of the electric blanket on the thermometer, things happen in the field every day that can influence sensory readouts and no longer are relevant to true conditions. Routine field validations are required to confirm that soil moisture data is accurate and relevant, to determine how the selected measurement site relates to the rest of the field, taking into consideration sandy soils, heavier soils, and problem areas. Finally, to check the efficiency of a variable rate prescription and adjust for in-season variation. Once the base prescription is running and soil moisture probes are installed, United Ag checks the field and checks their performance to make adjustments to variable rate prescriptions as are needed. We engage with what's going on in the field and validate that data is accurate and representative in order to effectively apply technology to management decisions that deliver a positive return on investment. The key to our success is grower input. We work with the producer to implement all that we have talked about into their water management program. And this is key if you have in your mind, how do we incorporate this? Get a hold of your local agronomist and get some help on learning how these things apply. We seek to understand their management strategy and system limitations, what works, what doesn't work, and what their water management goals are. We then go to the field together and look at the technology. We got to get the grower, the service provider, and the technology all calibrated to one another so that what we're seeing in the field by hand is the same thing that the soil moisture probe is seeing and the same thing that the grower desires. Finally, we work together to implement an irrigation strategy that works for the dynamics of their operation, the dynamics of their field, and for that crop. In the end, when applied agronomically in the field, precision irrigation strategies enable plant genetics, fertilizer, weed and pest control, and all other inputs to maximize their potential and deliver a positive return on investment. Although precision irrigation can be very detailed, and it is really quite simple to operate. To get started with variable rate irrigation, start with an EC map, apply agronomics to the technology, and work with a local service provider that can help get you going. In the Pacific Northwest, feel free to give us a call at United Ag. We'd be happy to help you out. That's all I have at this point.
Okay, great.
Right.
Let's ask the panel to join us again, and also the other presenters, Terry and Nick. Let's get the whole team together for a wrap-up conversation. Chad, let's start with you. Let's start with the panel first. Chad, what was the most important thing that David just said for us?
I think boots on the ground is probably a really important thing, and making sure that the data you get has some fidelity of what's happening in the field to build confidence in your decisions.
What do you think? What was the most important thing?
Well, I had a question for David. It was some of the things he was talking about was in that particular field was he had a weed patch and he had wind issues. My question is how did he identify those areas? Both, I mean, I understand you can go out and find a weed patch, but was there any other way besides having his feet on the ground? Did he use aerial imagery? And then spatially, how did he determine where those areas were so he can affect it with his VRI?
That's a great question. We use multiple tools to do that. One effective avenue is aerial imagery to know where to look, but really it comes down to feet in the field. Periodically, we do a thorough field evaluation, pulling samples throughout the field to characterize soil moisture. And I might raise a caution, if you're going to do that, don't only go in one tower of the pivot. Make sure that you look in multiple spans, multiple towers, because distribution uniformity can also be a problem and be misleading. So we do a very thorough field evaluation where we check soil moisture in the field and identify these issues. while we're there, we have a GPS to give us those points so we can come back and adjust the prescription accordingly.
So do you ever use 2 or 3 different tools to verify? Like you're in the field and you find an area, do you ever go to like your aerial imagery and then maybe catch something you didn't see on the other side of the field that's having the same issues? Or
yeah, we like to look at the aerial imagery before we go to the field. That helps guide where we're looking.
Can I ask how often you do these field checks? Is it once per season or more frequent, less frequent?
That's a very good question. It's in part crop dependent. For example, if we're doing VRI on alfalfa seed, during the month of June, we're there every week because it's very critical to catch it in that growth stage. On corn, potatoes, our general average approach, because we're not running variable rate irrigation every irrigation event, we'll do a thorough field evaluation at least monthly to see if there are any in-season variations that have occurred or if we need to make adjustments to the prescription based on compaction or high salts or infiltration rates that we may not have anticipated at the beginning of the season. So frequency would be at least monthly, and depending on the growth stage and crop, perhaps more often than that.
Rorik, for you, your opinion of the most important thing David said, and then any question you have for him.
Well, the interesting part is everything he said is important, but it validates Terry and Nick's and all of us over and over again is the importance of that partnership with that boots on the ground, the agronomist or agronomy or service provider and the grower. He laid it out really, really well, and we could speak for hours as growers, and there's a lot of questions I would have with David, but I mean it absolutely puts in perspective just how important it is to have that relationship.
Okay, now I got a question for again, this is for the growers, for both Rorik and Stephen. I'm a grower, and I don't currently work with an agronomist. I'm going to go get an agronomist to help me figure out how to do this. What are the top 3 questions I'm going to ask that guy to ferret out whether he knows what he's talking about or not? How do I know before I engage that this guy knows what he's talking about?
I guess I'll jump in there. I use 2 agronomists. I have one that is very aggressive, is very up to speed, and actually dabbles in kind of that early adoption side. And then I have a very traditional agronomist, and we split the farm in half, but they equally share the cropping rotation. So I would encourage people to take a look at that, if that is an opportunity. Then secondly is just how tech savvy are they? Are they willing to go into a field with an iPad and utilize some type of a scouting software that delivers in real time and also georeferences where they've been in the field? And then thirdly is their willingness to engage at the level that David is many of them don't get nearly as intimate with all of that data or the equipment. Those would be my 3 questions.
Steve, how about you? Did he cover it all, or is there another indicator you look for or you would look for before you pick somebody out?
Well, usually when you're talking to an agronomist about these types of things, I look for someone who knows more than me, which, I mean, you just have to. Yep. You have to bring something to the table that you don't already know about. If he can offer you up something that you haven't thought about, then that's a pretty good indication that he would be good to work with.
Yep, and I'm going to just jump in here right now and point out that we are at the ending point. We're into overtime, and audience, this group is going to stay and answer questions for as long as there are questions. I think I'm not even going to do a wrap-up question because I think we've done really quite well. There's no need to have a formal wrap at this point. Audience, if you're not able to stay past the 2-hour mark, thanks so much. And presenters, we held on to about 92% of the audience for the entire 2 hours. So hats off to all of you guys. You must be very, very scintillating. Let's just pause there. I will now direct the same line of questioning, though, to the manufacturers, to the suppliers. When is it that you know when an agronomist calls you, oh my goodness, he does? What are the indicators between one that you would heartily recommend versus one that you'd suggest maybe find somebody else? Let's get that one to Rick first.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, you went ahead. Go ahead, Terry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
What sets off the red flag for us as an organization is when we're talking to an agronomist or an irrigation dealer, and they would make a broad brush statement that, really all this water management stuff, it's really not, it's kind of all voodoo. It really doesn't matter, or it's kind of the lazy intellectual thoughts that sends up the red flags. And at that point, you probably don't have a willing dance partner.
Rick?
Nick?
I'm sorry, Nick. Oh, your mic's off.
Yeah, I kind of hit on what Terry and Rorick both said, but you got to find those agronomists that really believe in the value of data. There are some, even if they are traditional, they still believe in the value of data, or there's others won't trust or believe in the data no matter what. They still got to go out and do the hand feel method to irrigation, check their soils or whatever it might be. So kind of trusting what the data, and then, as David said, good data is the key, so you still need a ground check, but you got to trust in the potential value of the data to get started.
So, David, is this stuff resonating in your brain? And is there anything you could say to add to these observations without getting in too much trouble the next time you go to a society meeting?
I think, the thing that's running through my mind right now is how critical that relationship is between the local agronomist, the grower, crop metrics, and AgSense, because each piece of that has a very powerful weight in the success of the program. I couldn't do what I do without the data. We couldn't do what we do with the data without the ability to transmit it through the AgSense system. And certainly the most powerful layer of information is the grower input. So that's all very, very important. As far as the right agronomist to pick, I would say somebody that cares about your operation, cares about the results and the outcome and the return on investment more than simply making a sale of some piece of technology.
So, David, one more question for you. If there's somebody on the line from, say, Alberta or Calgary or, that's silly, from Calgary or Louisiana or Tennessee where you are not, if they wanted a recommendation to somebody who's as smart as you are, would you be able to help them find someone?
It's pretty easy to find someone smarter than me. But I would welcome their calls or their emails, and we'll do everything we can to get them connected with other precision data specialist agronomists around the globe. You bet.
So, okay, we'll, by the way, audience, we'll send out an evaluation form that will enable you to ask those questions of either David or anybody else on the panel. Let's do a quick roundabout and just close this up. Oh, before we do that, I'm sorry. Ron, you've been looking at questions. Are there any questions from the audience that the standard proceedings have not addressed yet that we should call out and address right now?
Yes, there are a couple, and I'll go in order. Chris Ward had a question regarding tools that could be used to measure critical water-related metrics in plants versus the soil. Are there any tools out there that you're aware of? Anyone?
There are some, but they're not currently tied to any telemetry device. So it's a manual collection of data in the field. There's a pressure bond. There are some sensors manufactured by Lycor, Campbell Scientific, and Decagon that have that capability to monitor moisture in the plant. And then you may draw correlations to soil moisture. But again, those are manual measurements in the field.
Got it. And Chris Ward also had another question. How do you view the potential for hyperspectral identify crop stresses, nutrient, or identification?
I think there's a tremendous potential for that. The challenge is technology is faster than the research. So technology is moving forward, abilities are coming out, and typically we've waited for university and research institutions to validate the efficiency or capability of those sensors and those technologies. And fact remains, develop much faster than research can validate. So I think there's a huge potential, but you may have to do some of your own on-farm research to see how it fits for you.
So a follow-up question for you, Chad, with this is what's the real potential for the use of UAVs or drones to really get a good sense of what's going on with your soil? Is that there today?
I think there's a lot of potential there. There's certainly work in the area. You know, the drones get you more flexibility in terms of scheduling than you get with manned flight, or potentially you could get that benefit in scheduling relative to manned flights. And, you know, we just bought a spectral camera, hyperspectral camera to test out that's strappable to a UAV to see, to help validate, you know, what Dave's talking about. So there's tremendous there. I think there's also, you know, I advise people to fly safe and fly legally their UAVs, and the legal landscape for flying UAVs, even on your own land, is evolving in terms of FAA permissions and sort of what are they called, certificates of authorization for flights. So I think that in my opinion, what's holding back the UAV application more than the technology itself is the regulation that's associated with flying legally.